Colette. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Scottish Police Authority Legal Committee. Can I first of all welcome Nancy Johnson to the committee. It's her first legal committee, and Nancy will be taking over from me as chair after this meeting. Gary, can I also, Brian, can I also welcome you to the committee? It's good to have both of you on board. It's also worth noting, and I'll come back to this later in the agenda, this is Mary Pitt-Keithley and Tom Halpin's last meeting as they're stepping down from the board in due course. Tom's actually an apology today, but I'll come back to that later on in the meeting. So we have apologies today from Tom Halpin, from Duncan Campbell, and from James Douglas. Can I take any declarations of interest and connections from members? Thank you very much. I see none. There are no decisions taken by correspondence since the last meeting. And moving to item 1.5, can I take agreement that we just take items 8 to 13 in private in accordance with section 20 of the SPA standing orders?
Yes.
Everybody content? Thank you very much. Can I move to item 2, which is minutes and actions from the previous meeting? Can I first of all take 2.1, a minute of the meeting held on the 6th of November 2025. Are we content to approve that minute?
Yes.
Thank you. I take the rolling action log and matters arising. In terms of the action log, 3 actions are proposed for closure. Can I suggest that we close the first 2 of those and come back to the third in conjunction with item 3 on the agenda?
Agreed.
Everybody content?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Can I move to item 3 then, which is legal service claims handling quarterly statistical information report? And this is a report for discussion to be presented by Claire Pender. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Morning. This is the standing quarterly report in relation to settlement of claims against Police Scotland. The report is set out in 4 parts. The first part deals with claims that have been settled. The second part deals with claims currently being dealt with. The third part provides an update on the Workplace Relations Organisational Learning Group, which I've previously mentioned in the last committee meeting. And the fourth part deals with other legal work that is dealt with by Police Scotland Legal Services. Turning to the first part of the report, this sets out the number of claims settled in the Q3 period, October to December 2025, and that is broken down by employer's liability, employment tribunal, public liability and motor liability. In Q3, a total of 100 claims were settled. 15 employers' liability claims were settled at a total cost of £511,809, which is an average settlement figure per case of 34,121. But members will note that 2 of those 15 cases account for £410,000 of the total settlement figure. The total figure for the financial year to date for employers' liability claims is £579,829. 7 employment tribunal claims were settled in the quarter at a total cost of £693,423. That is an average settlement figure of £99,060. There are 2 settlements noted in the £75,000 to £150,000 range. It's worth just highlighting that one of those cases was an award following on from a tribunal hearing rather than a settlement, and the other is not actually an employment tribunal case, but relates to arrears of pay following reinstatement. that seems to have been miscategorised as an ET claim. And members will also note that one settlement accounts for £376,605 of the total figure. And that is a case that the committee are aware of, which was brought to the Committee for Authority to Settle. The total figure for the year to date for ET claims is £799,048, but that's subject to the caveat of the two cases that I've mentioned. 21 public liability claims were settled in Q3 at a total cost of £160,270, which is an average of £7,632, and the total figure for the year to date for PL claims is £231,871. 57 motor liability cases were settled at a total cost of £352,587. There appears to be an error in the average figure in that table. This is on page 5 of the report. The average settlement figure should be 6,185, not 79,957, I think. And the total figure for the year to date for motor liability claims is £956,131. On page 6 of the report, there is a graphical representation of settlements for the past 3 financial years across employers' liability, public liability and ET claims. There are some peaks and dips, but on the whole, there isn't a huge amount of variance, generally speaking, from quarter to quarter or year to year, and the figures are relatively static. There has been a bit of a downward trend in motor liability claims, which we have discussed at previous meetings. That appears to have levelled out somewhat, albeit there's a slight reduction in Q3. Turning to the second part of the report, the cases currently being dealt with. Page 7 shows the number of employers' liability claims currently being dealt with. That figure is still fairly high in comparison to previous years, and that largely seems to be because of the multiple claims arising from the one incident in Edinburgh that members are aware of. That accounts for 29 of the 37 cases that we currently have in the East. And the second highest figure in that table of 24 in the West is in line with what we've seen in previous years. Members may have noted that there was a slight dip in Q2, but that seems to have been a bit of an anomaly and no particular reason behind that. Page 8 of the report provides a bit more detail as to the types of claim and division or department. Those figures remain in line with previous reports, with injuries at work accounting for the majority of claims, which is what we would generally expect in terms of employers' liability claims. Page 9 of the report shows the number of employment tribunal claims being dealt with, broken down by the type of claim and division or department. Members will see that there's 45 ongoing employment tribunal claims at the moment. Disability discrimination claims remain by far the highest proportion of claims, and that's reflected across the country in terms of the increase in disability discrimination claims that ACAS are reporting. But there is continuous ongoing work led by human resources around disability discrimination, and in particular in relation to reasonable adjustments. And that is a particular area of focus of the new workplace organisational learning review group, which I've provided a bit more detail on in the report later on. Page 10 shows the number of public liability claims broken down by area. The numbers in Q1 and Q2 were lower than we would usually expect to see. Not aware of any particular reason for that, but the figures have certainly risen again to a figure in line with last year's. Page 11 shows a breakdown of the types of public liability claims. There is still a high number of claims in the other category which haven't been categorised, which we are working on. The claims register is still fairly new and is still a bit of a work in progress. The majority of claims, public liability claims, appear to relate to damage to property. Given the nature of police work and the amount of productions, etc., that we deal with, that is generally what we would expect to see. Likewise, unlawful arrest, which is the second highest figure. Again, given the nature of policing, that's not unexpected. On page 12, I've provided some further detail on the workplace organisational learning review group meeting that I mentioned. So this is a new group that was implemented in October 2025 to ensure a structured and effective approach to capturing, reviewing, assessing and responding to learning linked specifically to HR case outcomes such as grievances, employment tribunals, disciplinary cases. I've set out the key objectives of the group, which are to identify root causes, inform policy and practice, mitigate future risk, and foster a learning culture. And the tracking of learning and its implementation will be through a live ongoing action plan owned by the group. The group is to meet on a quarterly basis and will report into DCC Spears Professionalism and Enabling Services Management Board. The group met on the 3rd of March, and that was essentially the first meeting. There had been a previous meeting which was just looking at terms of reference. So the first inaugural meeting essentially was the 3rd of March. At that meeting, there was a thematic baseline review paper presented based on recent ET cases and grievances, and that was produced as basically a starting point for organisational learning in this area. And that thematic review highlights a number of recurring themes, particularly around reasonable adjustments, how processes and procedures are applied, how meetings are conducted, and issues like record keeping. It was agreed at that meeting that the initial area of focus would be around that reasonable adjustment piece and the proper and effective application of the processes that we have in place. Because whilst we do have processes in place, the issues tend to arise when they're not followed or there is inconsistent application. Exactly how that is to be taken forward will be the next part of the discussion. It is intended that there will be 6 monthly organisational learning reports produced by the HR case team, which will be submitted to the Workplace Relations Organisational Learning Group. So the group is still in the very early stages, but starting to look at what the future of organisational learning in that employee relations space might look like. And that is the statistics report and an update on the Workplace Relations Organisational Learning Group, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Claire, thank you very much indeed for the report and for taking us through it and highlighting a number of important issues and picking up on 1 or 2 inaccuracies. That's really, really helpful. This is obviously an item for discussion. I will open it up for questions in a moment. I see a couple of members have their hands up. Important, obviously, to remind ourselves that as this item is being taken in public, no reference should be made to any individual cases during this discussion or indeed any other discussion. I just wanted to it's important to remind ourselves of that. So I am going to go to Brian first.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question really is just to understand the sort of underlying trend in workloads. I think at paragraph 1.8, you mentioned 100 cases have been settled in the quarter. And I was just wondering whether that sort of compares to what's on page 22, where if you add up the leading to new files being opened cases in the quarter, that's 100 as well. Is that comparable, and does that tell us is a kind of steady state in terms of work coming in and work being discharged? Or is there something else I need to know in that to understand whether workloads are going up or down in terms of litigation?
I don't have the figures, the past figures that would enable me to give a kind of confident answer to that question. It's something that I could take away. Certainly the feeling in the department, and certainly when we look at legal inquiries and new files on a week-to-week basis, that has increased quite significantly in the past year or so. At the moment, it seems to have been, I mean, it can fluctuate from week to week, but generally it's fairly static at the moment, but there has been an increase certainly in recent years, but I don't have the figures from past years to give any sort of comparable figures, if you like. Does that help at all?
Brian, are you content with that answer for the moment? It's something we may wish to come back to.
I'm content at the moment, Chair. I was just to try and understand really in the data whether it's, we can see whether there's a trend in each quarter about whether workloads are going up or down. It's probably something to come back to in future, probably.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. Nancy.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions. One is a small one on page 5. the motor liability claims financial total for the year 25-26, I think there's a typo for the average value, because if the total settlements is close to 1 million and there's almost 200 cases, the average value can't be 256,000. So if that could be updated, that would be great. The more substantive question is around the Workplace Organizational Learning Review Group. I'm very happy to see that that is now set up, because it's certainly a concern to me, and I'm sure to others in the committee, that there are so many cases in employment tribunal where the cause is around disability, a failure to enact reasonable adjustments, etc. So I'm also pleased that that is one of the themes that has come out of the thematic review that you mentioned as a startup. I think it would be really important for us to get an update from that review group. I would have ideally liked it to be at the next meeting in June, but that might be too early. But perhaps we could have some insight at the next meeting, also in terms of what the report, the 6-monthly report, is going to look like, so that we have an early opportunity to feed in if there are other points that we think it ought to cover. Because making sure that there is adequate understanding of what the root causes of the failure to address, for example, reasonable adjustments processes. You know, is it a failure in the process? Is it a failure in the management that did not respond to a request? Or what are the circumstances, so that we can see what the learnings are going to be and how rapidly those learnings can be implemented. Because 6-monthly reports sounds great, but I would actually be happier if there was much more rapid learning and implementation. You know, if it's only happening once every 6 months, that's not fast enough. So I would be grateful for an update at the next meeting, even if that's not the full report.
Yep, of course, I can certainly
Nancy.
update at the next meeting. Sorry, Chair.
Yeah,
Yes,
no problem.
of course, I can update at the next meeting, and I can certainly feed that back to the HR case team and the Workplace Relations Organisational Learning Group in terms of the speed of, or the pace of learning in the 6-monthly report. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Thank you, Claire. So I'm going now to Pauline.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. I'm here to present the paper for the public inquiries update.
Sorry, Pauline.
Sorry.
Apologies. I'm going to Pauline Howie.
Sorry, my apologies.
That's okay.
Overeager.
No problem. I didn't spot that quick enough. Thank you. Thanks. We'll come to you shortly, Pauline. Pauline Howie.
Thanks very much, and Claire, thanks for the continuing work that's been done in terms of making this report more responsive to what members have been asking for. Greatly appreciate the work that goes on behind the scenes and pulling this together. Got a few questions on some of the tables, please. I noticed that for employers' liability, ET liability and public liability, there seems to be quite a few claims settled in Q3. And I wondered why that was the case. It seems to be quite a high proportion of the overall year to date. If you've got any insights as to what might be going on there. The second question was around the ET claims, and those that are settled, are they generally in respect of disability discrimination? And are there other themes in there? And I'm sure some of those will come out in the report that you're going to bring back next month in response to Nancy's question. On table 1.9 of the report, we've spoken before about the positive trend in terms of motor liability claims coming down a stepped level over the last few quarters. But I think you can see in that table that since Q1 23-24, there has been an increase in ET employers and public liability claims. And it'd be helpful to understand what's going on behind those increases in those three categories. And again, what we can do potentially to reduce those. And I think that goes back to the terms of reference for the Workplace Learning Review Group. Where are the wider learnings being taken forward? Because it seems to be quite kind of focused in terms of employment matters, but where are the wider organisational learning themes being progressed, and how do we know that they are indeed being taken forward into practice? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Pauline. Claire.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the first question, which was the apparent high volume of settlements in this quarter, I think I know I've said in previous meetings, the nature of litigation is it can just depend on how a claim progresses and the timing at which it comes to that settlement. So if we have a number of claims that are all just settling at the one time, that's not really something that's within our control. It's just the nature of litigation. However, I did notice that, and I think I had reported for the previous 2 quarters of the year that the settlement figures had been lower than previous years. So again, I think it's just the timing of the cases. So I think we've seen a couple of quarters where the settlements have been lower, and then we've kind of caught up in this quarter with a higher volume of settlements. So I don't think there's anything necessarily behind that. As I say, it just comes down to the timing of the cases. In terms of the employment tribunal settlements, as you probably would expect, given that the majority of claims that we have are disability discrimination, then yes, the majority of settlements are disability discrimination related. But there are other cases in there, sex discrimination cases, and yeah, I'm trying to think off the top of my head what recent settlements have been. But to answer your point, yes, I think the majority are disability discrimination, but not solely disability discrimination. The ETPL and EL figures, yes, I can see in Q2, Q3, there has been an increase in comparison, I suppose, to 2023, 2024 Q1, but the figures do go up and down, and there's not a huge amount of variance. So I don't think there is anything necessarily again behind that. I think it's just the nature of the claims that we deal with when they come up. I don't know that I don't know that I have an answer as to why there's specific variances quarter to quarter. It's something that I can take away and maybe have a wee bit of a more in-depth analysis, in-depth look at, and come back to the next committee meeting with, if that would be helpful.
Pauline.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And I know that there is obviously variance, and you can see that on the chart. I think this chart's quite difficult to read because there's such a high volume of motor claims in comparison to the other 3 categories. But if you just looked at the other 3 categories, you would probably see, and if you put kind of a control limits on those run charts, you would see that there would be kind of for some areas that might be out with control, and it would be worthwhile to understand what's going on there. And what actually lies behind it in terms of what's the organisational learning, or is there something more broadly happening within the organisation or wider that is behind the kind of the increase, because there definitely is an increasing trend over the years and over the quarters. So it would be really helpful to understand what lies behind that, and then going back to where is the wider learning going on across the organisation into those broader themes?
Yes, apologies, I missed that one. So the wider learning, obviously the focus at the moment is in that workplace relations space, but you're right to highlight that there is, that's not the sole claims that we deal with. We do have public liability claims, motor liability claims. The learning in that space is more difficult to deal with because, generally speaking, those cases arise out of human error, one-off incidents, accidents, rather than kind of systemic issues in terms of processes. If any learning is identified out of those cases, it would be fed into DCC Spears PESMB board, but it is an area that we're still kind of trying to get to grips with, I have to say, organisational learning in that wider litigation space. I don't think we're fully on top of it yet, because it is more difficult to deal with. Just in terms of identifying, capturing the learning, so it is a bit of a working process. I'm sorry, it's not entirely a satisfactory answer, but it's not a straightforward fix, I don't think.
Pauline? Oh, I'll take DCC Spears first, and I'll come back to you, Pauline. Alan, please.
Yeah, I just probably want to make a bit of an honest kind of self-reflection. I think we've got a fair amount of work to still do in the organisational learning space here. More often than not, in some of the employment spaces, we're making decisions based on shortcomings on the part of line managers. And I think there's definitely more we can do. I think part of the challenge for me is it's pretty widespread, and it's how do we come up with an organisational learning plan that can impact right across the organisation when you think of the volume of line managers who potentially could have a locus in this. So is there common themes? There absolutely is, and is there things that I think we can do? So it needs to be a really sharp focus going into the next financial year. And we're certainly talking through what that would look like, but I couldn't give you absolute confidence, Pauline, just now that we're nailing this in this space. But there is an absolute desire to try and get plans in place. It probably sits more in the HR space than it sits in the legal space, but we're working hard to try and look at what does that look like.
Thank you. Thanks, Alan. Pauline.
Yeah, thanks both Claire and DCC Spears. Yeah, I think I personally I don't mind if it comes back to legal committee or people committee, but I think it's that you both kind of confirmed that there are wider organisational learning points, and I think it would be important from a governance perspective, Chair, if we could get assurance that when Police Scotland have got their plans in place as to how they're going to progress that in a systematic way, that's reported back to one of those two committees. Thanks.
Thank you, Pauline. I think that commitment is there from DCC Spears and Claire. Happy to take that as an action. So Nancy, I'll come to you, and then we'll move to close this item and move on to the next item. Nancy.
Thank you, Chair. I think in line with the discussion just the last few minutes and DCC Spears' points, I wonder whether the open action that had been left open should remain open for the time being and be discharged hopefully at the next meeting, because I think there is still some action needed on the part of Police Scotland in terms of looking at the low level claims and how learning from them is gathered and fed out. So I would propose that action be continued and not be closed off at this time.
Thank you, Nancy. I was going to come to that obviously before we closed off this item. Can I just check before I try and sum up where we've got to, that there are no further questions from members at this point? Okay, thank you. So we have a number of actions there, which I know Colette will have recorded in relation to workload, the organisational learning review group, and organisational learning more widely, as discussed just now. Are members content to agree that we leave the open? We leave that action log open until the next meeting. noting that there is an absolute commitment and desire on the part of colleagues from Police Scotland to get to grips with these issues in the coming financial year. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, colleagues. We're on time, which is always good. And I'm going to move to item 4, which is the non-disclosure agreements annual report. Noting that we have actually had sight of this report, and it's being brought back to the committee today for public discussion.
Yes, Chair. So this is...
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. This is the annual report on Police Scotland's use of non-disclosure agreements, which arises out of previous scrutiny and criticism around the use of NDAs in the past, as a result of which the committee wished to be satisfied in terms of the governance around the use of NDAs by Police Scotland. This is the second annual report to the committee of this type, and it covers the period July 2024 to June 2025. As you just said, Chair, the report should have been brought to the committee I think 2 meetings ago, which is why the reporting period is not up to date. This year's report to be submitted later in the year will provide the up-to-date figures. So members will see that during 2024-2025, there have been 3 cases in which a non-disclosure agreement was used, and in one of those cases, the inclusion of the non-disclosure agreement was an error as a result of an oversight on the part of our external solicitor. There shouldn't have been an NDA included in that case. In the other 2 cases, the NDA was used for commercial reasons, purely to prevent information about the terms of the settlement sum specifically becoming public. In certain cases, information about offers of settlement or the amount of settlement can become commercially sensitive if, for example, it becomes known that a settlement of a certain amount has been paid in a certain type of case. That can have an impact on our ability to negotiate in future similar cases. Police Scotland continues to have a policy that we don't use an NDA unless there is a good reason to do so. They're not used routinely. Included in the report is a percentage representation of the total of all claims settled in the year. Members will note that this represents a usage of NDAs in around 1.1% of the total number of cases settled. In reality, it would be fairly unusual for an NDA to feature in a PL or a motor liability claim. They are generally more likely to be considered in an employment tribunal or employer's liability claim, and the proportion in comparison to the number of ET and ELCs is slightly higher, representing around 7% of the employment cases settled. But as I say, one of those NDAs was included in error, so that figure is slightly higher than it would otherwise have been. The NDAs used in these cases explicitly provide that nothing in the agreement will prevent the claimant from making a whistleblowing disclosure or reporting any wrongdoing. In addition, as the NDA covers the terms of the settlement only, and the claimant is not prevented from disclosing any other information about the claim, such as the nature or the details of the claim. We do continue to monitor the use of NDAs through a register of NDAs in which any NDA is recorded together with the justification for the use of the NDA on that occasion. I hope the report gives the committee some assurance that NDAs are not routinely used and that there is appropriate governance around the use of NDAs, but again, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Claire. That's very helpful. And I'm now going to open up for questions, mindful again that obviously no individual cases should be referred to in the public session. So I will move first to Brian before coming to Nancy and Pauline. Brian.
I'm delighted to see such a low level of NDAs in use, and I think that report demonstrates that. I suppose my question, I get this is a 24-25 activity report, but just on the basis of your mentioning the register that's kept, I just wondered for 25-26, are you aware of anyone having an NDA disclosure who's a senior officer or member of staff that might end up being disclosed in the remuneration report for this year? Have we got anybody in that kind of area that we might have to know about from remuneration reports?
Thank you, Brian. Claire?
No, I'm not aware of any NDAs in such cases to date in 25-26.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Brian. I'll move now to Nancy.
Thank you, Chair. And it's, slightly echoing Brian's comments, I'm really pleased at the low percentage of NDAs being used. I think that reflects really good practice on Police Scotland's part, because we should be trying to set the example of not using NDAs whenever possible. So I think what would be helpful going forward is in those cases where an NDA is used, it would be helpful to have insight as to what was so different about those cases that it was deemed to be commercially sensitive. And this is not something to be done retroactively and to be doing extra work, but just going forward in your register, if you can make sure to include kind of details as to what marks out cases as being so different from the norm that some element of NDA is considered to be necessary. And I would encourage you to continue the practice that you have of considering, is it just the amount of the settlement, or is it the terms of the settlement as well, in the sense that even if commercial needs mean that the amount of the settlement should be kept confidential, that doesn't necessarily mean the rest of the terms should be kept confidential. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Claire, did you want to offer any comment in response to that?
I can certainly bring that information going forward, and yes, I entirely take on board the point about amount of settlement or terms of settlement. I think that's just something for me to take away and speak to the solicitors about.
Thanks very much indeed, Claire. I'm moving now to Pauline Howie.
Yeah, thanks very much. And again, would echo colleagues' comments about the relatively low use of NDAs. The report does mention one which was an NDA was applied in error, and I'm interested in what procedures have now been put in place to prevent such errors happening in future.
So in advance of that, we had made all of our external solicitors aware of that we don't use an NDA unless there is a good reason to do so. This has just been a one-off error, but since that has happened, we have obviously reiterated that with our external solicitors. The external solicitors should be coming to us in each case with the draft Cot 3 or settlement agreement to obtain our instructions on the terms of that. It just didn't happen in this case, and it was just an administrative oversight on the part of the external solicitor. So the guidance to the external solicitors has been reiterated that we don't use NDAs and that they should be coming to us for instructions rather than entering into or signing a Cot 3 or settlement agreement on our behalf without doing so.
Thanks, Claire. Pauline, are you happy to take the assurance?
I think not quite, because it sounds as if, although we've reiterated the guidance, this could happen again. And I wonder if we need to do more procedurally to prevent it happening again.
Again, I can take that away and have a think about it. And I'm not sure off the top of my head what else we could do. We are reliant on our external agents to a certain extent. They as part of our framework and the terms on which they are engaged, they should be coming to us for instructions. Where it's a one-off administrative oversight, I take the point that it could happen again. Of course, it could happen. It's just been an error on the part of the individual solicitor. I'm not sure what other controls we could put in place to mitigate against that happening, but I'm happy to take it away and have a further think about it and engage with our external solicitors to see if I can come back with something a bit more reassuring for the committee.
Thanks for the question, Pauline, and obviously thanks for the assurance and for the commitment to have a look. I appreciate in that context that it is always possible it could happen again. But if there is some mechanism, some control that could be put in place that that mitigates that risk, then I think that's what Pauline is looking for. Mary, I'm assuming that Pauline has asked your question. Great. Okay. Thank you. Colleagues, we're happy to move on now. The commitment is to bring the annual report back later this calendar year. So I think that'll be September. Is that right, Claire? To get this back.
Yes, I think it was. I think it's around August. Yeah.
August, September. Okay. Yeah. But the commitment is there to get this back on track in terms of the timescales. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Can I move now to Superintendent Pauline Thompson on the public inquiries update?
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. Thank you. I've been asked to update on this paper today for the public inquiries section, and this also responds to an action that was raised in November, action number 3 from the November meeting for ACC Ratcliffe. Police Scotland is fully supportive of Scotland's public inquiry process, and we remain committed to engaging transparently and constructively with all statutory inquiries. We continue to provide comprehensive cooperation to support fact-finding processes and the development of recommendations that promote public trust. However, in recent years, the scale, duration and complexity of public inquiries in Scotland have increased, which has had an impact nationally. If I can take you to paragraph 1.3 on page 2, we then have begun to outline the financial costs of public inquiry. As the Chair and members will be aware, Police Scotland receives no budgeted provision which is dedicated to support public inquiries, resulting in all associated costs, particularly legal fees and staffing, to be absorbed from core revenue budgets, creating significant financial pressures and reducing flexibility in our resource allocation. From the table that you'll see on page 3, the inquiry into the death of Sheku Bayou continues to be the most financially significant for Police Scotland, totalling over 25 million to date. In the financial period 24-25, this was around 6.6 million. We see a decrease 25-26 period, however that's due to the pause in that particular public inquiry. For the 25-26 financial year to date, other public inquiries have incurred additional costs of 1.5 million across various account codes. The 1.5 million is made up of police officer costs, staff officer costs, legal costs and other running costs. In the wider national context, we can see that overall, across all participating public bodies 2025-26, public inquiries are estimated to have cost over 200 million. This demonstrates the long-term and sustained financial pressures that inquiry participation places on the wider public sector. On page 4, paragraph 1.5, there are some points there around the impact that this has on our policing operations. We recognise that the considerable costs associated with inquiries require tough prioritisation for us around budget decisions. The costs are high, escalating and unpredictable, and Police Scotland as participants have no control over the duration or the scope of any inquiry, which affects our planning and staff allocation. This can lead to further operational strain as specialist staff, legal teams and senior leaders are reallocated to deal with public inquiry work. In relation to the impact on our communities, this undoubtedly has impact for local communities and policing outcomes. There can see a reduction in local prevention and partnership initiatives. It may affect capacity to address non-urgent crime types, but we do acknowledge that absorbing inquiry costs frequently impacts our ability around staffing for community policing functions. While inquiries are essential for transparency and public trust, the resource demands require careful management to ensure community policing standards are maintained. And that concludes my update. Thank you.
You're on mute, Chair.
You think I'd have learnt by now. Apologies, everyone. Thank you very much, Pauline, for the report and for introducing the report. I'm mindful that this issue was touched on at the recent meeting of the Authority Board, and that it's an issue that the Resources Committee will also have an interest in, but we have an opportunity here to consider it in perhaps a little more detail than is possible within the scope of that committee. And I know Pauline may wish to comment in that regard. But before I get to any comments Pauline has, I will take questions from Nancy in first instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think first I have just one or two questions to understand some aspects of the report, and in particular looking at the figures in the table under 1.3. I just wanted to understand police officer costs, police staff costs. Is that reflecting essentially the time away from day-to-day work?
Chair, can we go to Claire Louise for that?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. The table is provided from finance, so I'm happy to answer that question. It relates to the officers and the staff that are dedicated to working in the public inquiry team. So there's a dedicated team over those financial years that have been aligned there, and that's where their payroll costs have been charged against.
Okay, so those are staff and officers who have been, just to be clear, taken away from other duties to be dedicated to the public inquiry, and therefore there is an opportunity cost in the sense that that time that they are devoting to the inquiry, which I completely agree with you, we need to fully support the inquiry, but that is time, manpower that is not dedicated to other priorities.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
When you say legal costs, is that costs for external legal spend, or is that costs for the legal team in Police Scotland who are dedicated to public inquiries?
That is the external costs. The legal team who are working on the public inquiry feature in the police staff costs. So that is all our external costs that we are incurring as a result of the public inquiry that's charged against legal costs.
I think if it is possible to do, and I suspect that it probably is within the finance systems, it would be helpful to have the police staff cost broken out between legal team members and non-legal team members. Again, it's to get a better understanding of what the opportunity cost is. And bearing in mind, as the chair said, the board discussion about how future public inquiries need to be funded and managed. We've just had the dreadful fire at Glasgow Central Station, and that will almost certainly lead to a public inquiry, which Police Scotland will need to have some involvement in. So it would be good to be thinking now about new public inquiries and how information is going to be tracked to help support the business case for additional funding for public inquiries.
Happy to do that.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Chair.
Well, twice in one day. I apologise. I am concentrating, probably too much. I think that's probably what's happening. So thank you very much, and thanks for the commitment, Claire Louise. Can I move now to DCC Spears, who wants to comment on that before I take further questions from members? Alan.
Yeah, probably for board members, I wanted to provide a little bit broader context. So obviously much of the costs that you can see attributed in this report relate to the public inquiry as it relates to Sheikh Bayou, and what we've seen over the last four or so years is the size of that team has flexed based on the demand that the public inquiry has presented. We have, as you know, over a period of significant time, advocated for some additional cost support as it relates to the implications of public inquiries, and that hasn't borne any fruit. What I would say going into the financial year that moves ahead, we carry enormous risk in this space because we have potentially got 6 public inquiries coming online at different stages, and we have a number of co-joined FAIs, which is a similar approach. So there's 2 implications. One, the external legal cost implications will rise quite significantly, but the requirement will be also on me to bolster that team greater than what it currently stands. So at the height of the inquiry team, as it responded to the Sheikh Bayou public inquiry, we had about 25 resources attached to that. So I would envisage that over the coming year, we will see a significant increase to that team, and that becomes just an organisational choice as to where we can draw staff and officers from. But it is a massive risk for us and financially going into the next financial year.
Thanks very much, Alan. Nancy, I will come back to you, but before I do that, I'm going to move to other members for questions as they've raised their hands. So I go now to Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Wow is what I can say to this. Is really it's an eye-opener in terms of the costs involved, and I think very much echoing Nancy's point about the opportunity costs forgone here, both directly in terms of staff time and cost, and also in terms of indirectly in terms of legal fees. My questions really are around two aspects to this. First of all, in paragraph 1.3, the comment there is about no dedicated budget provision, coming from Scottish Government on this aspect. I just wondered whether that is our accepted, policy or aim, given that I can guess it will remove risk from the costs and numbers of inquiries happening in terms of impact on police and police staffing, etc. But then it also means that we lose control over that to some extent, because it's then dependent on the number of inquiries leads to the amount of funding we get. So I just wanted to find out a bit to where we are organisationally, whether we think that is the thing to do. Secondly, I just wondered why we've only got Sheikh Bayou costs here in terms of the query there. Are there other ones? I think DCC Spears alluded to it. And is it just that we don't have the data on those in this granular format to be able to inform us? So I just wondered if there was more that could be reported in terms of the number of costs or the amount of costs.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. I'll move to Claire Louise and then to DCC Spears to comment on those questions. Claire Louise.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to pick up on the second point, if that's okay. So the granular detail isn't currently available at the moment for the other inquiries that are ongoing. Obviously, the Sheikh Bayou inquiry has been ongoing for some considerable years. It's probably the first time we've had such an inquiry, and we're obviously conscious of constantly being asked for freedom of information requests in relation to that particular inquiry. The other information is not as readily available because it's part of the overall, the setup of the inquiry team. It's part of the overall work that they're ongoing, so it's harder for us to extract the time, as an example, of the officers that are working on it, or the legal teams that are potentially dedicated. It is slightly more dedicated in the Sheikh Bayou space because it was the first one, so there's learning being taken from that, from a finance point of view, for us to try and progress that as we move into next financial year and being able to report that more accurately.
Thanks, Claire Louise. Alan.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to the second point that Claire Louise has made, we don't have a lot of resources who do public inquiry business on a part-time basis. So it's not particularly difficult for us to outline the opportunity costs as it relates, because we have dedicated solicitors inside the organisation, as well as police staff working homes, as well as a number of police officers. So I think we can provide that detail. I think we do have the costs that relate to our inquiries. I would argue that some of them are really the infancy. So the intimation of offshore, as we would call it, which is the public inquiry into Emma Caldwell, thus far is just in its infancy. So we haven't seen the driving force around costs. So it's more about the timing of where those public inquiries are at, rather than us having access to the data. I wasn't quite sure the first part of Brian's question. I didn't really understand what the ask was, so I'm conscious we haven't quite answered that one, Chair. So I don't know if we could just revisit the question that we were being asked there.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, Brian.
My question was just because there seems to be an assumption that the push here is to get dedicated budget provision from Scottish Government, which is related to the number of inquiries that are actually happening. Is that the accepted way to go, or is it something else that needs to be thought through on that? Because it removes risk in terms of getting funding which is related to the activity that's ongoing for inquiries, but it means if there's no inquiries, you won't get that funding at all, which doesn't give any flexibility in future to reapply anything to other areas. So I'm just wondering if that is the accepted way we're going in terms of trying to get dedicated provision, or is there some other arguments we need to go through about whether there's a need for so many inquiries, for example, overall. I just wonder whether it's accepted practice that we're arguing for separate budget provision for these things, earmarked budget provision.
Thanks, Brian. Alan, does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. So, Brian, we have no control over any decision to instigate a public inquiry. In some instances, we have a decision to make as to whether we would consider ourselves to be core participants within that public inquiry, but we don't have any control over that in the first instance. In the second instance, thus far, we've never had any budgetary provision for public inquiries, so we get largely two budget allocations, as you know, a revenue and a capital budget. And quite frankly, the money that we spend in public inquiries comes out the same pocket of money, if you like, that we would do for any other operational policing matter. What we do each year is advocate when we're constructing the budget bid, and you would have seen that in our budget ask for 26-27, where we specifically called out the demands of things like new legislation and public inquiries. So all we can do is on that annual cycle is highlight the impact of public inquiries and the costs associated with them. And I think the Chief and I would quite vigorously advocate with ministers and officials around any window or opportunities for some additional funding. Of course, what you don't always envisage when a public inquiry is announced and launched is the length of time that public inquiry takes. So I don't think when they intimated the public inquiry to Shakibaya, there was an expectation that fast forward 5 years, it would still be running, and it brings additional costs. There's a lot of examples of public inquiries across England and Wales, which are completed within 6 to 8 weeks. Southport would be one example. But as it stands just now in Scotland, our experience is that public inquiries do last for quite a period of time. I think there's a role for Police Scotland to continue to advocate for funding streams around it. I also think there's an avenue that the police authority need to be vocal in this space, because I'm using the same budget to police a football match on a Sunday as I am to commit money to a public inquiry, because it's all coming from the one place. Hopefully that makes some sense.
Thanks, Alan. Brian, does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it does. I think what concerns me slightly is probably the use of language. I'm not sure if we are really advocating for a dedicated budget provision, because earmarking it would mean that that goes up and down with the number of inquiries. I think, but the answer to me suggests that there's a couple of things going on there. One is advocating for much shorter inquiries, and secondly is around perhaps being clear in budget bids for the overall amount, how that should be impacted by the number of inquiries that are happening, I think.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to move now to Mary. Mary?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion and it's a very useful report, so thank you for that. It's the kind of report that begs so many questions, doesn't it? And I'm sure the public will find some of the figures in there interesting, surprising. But the general discussion there that Alan led us into is important, because there is clearly a movement at the moment to look at whether these inquiries represent value for money. They're very important that they get to the bottom of what's happened in certain situations, but the way they're being run at the moment means they are costing the public purse an enormous amount of money. And organisations like Police Scotland are being tied up for a long time in supporting these and providing input to them. So I think an examination of all of that would be really useful. But on a much more mundane matter, I think the report is slightly well, misleading, or just a small error has crept in to the table on page 3, where it would appear, if you look at it, that you have 3 separate legal costs lines there. Line 3 for legal costs, line 4 for council fees, and line 5 for other legal costs. Of course, lines 4 and 5 actually add up to line 3. So there's really one line for legal costs, which then has 2 separate components, one for council fees and one for other legal costs. Because I think if you get to the end, none of that adds up to the figure that's there. So it's just to have another look at how the table is presented and would make that a bit clearer, I think. But this is obviously something, I mean, that's a minor matter, but it helps the committee's understanding of the information and the public's understanding of the information. But just to recognise that putting a paper like this in the public is a step forward, considering that this information has never really been made available before. So well done.
Thanks very much, Mary. Claire Louise, I saw you raise your hand and then lower it. Was it on that point?
It was, just to say my apologies for that. Obviously, any future papers will have that tidied up, but you're absolutely right to pull that out, Mary. That is an error on my part, so I do apologise for that.
No need for apologies. It's just a presentational thing. Thanks, Claire Louise.
Thanks, Claire Louise. Thanks, Mary. Okay, so I'm conscious of time. This is an important discussion, but I'm also conscious of time. I'm going to go to Nancy, and then we'll try and bring the discussion to a close. Pauline, I know you don't have your hand up, but you may have a comment in terms of Resources Committee oversight in relation to this discussion. Nancy.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's helpful that there is a public inquiries team within Police Scotland, because it does help to track costs more effectively. I think it would be helpful for the team with finance support to think about whether the costs, whether some additional level of granularity can be included. So I've already mentioned tracking separately in-house solicitors from other police staff. I'm wondering, is there any way to get granularity going forward between the inquiries? Even if this is not perfect data, but something which gives a sense of, you know, is it 90% of the time is on Sheku Bayou, or some kind of order of magnitude, because that would help in terms of discussions with Scottish Government about future funding. Thinking also about DCC Spears's point about choice, and the fact that when there is a need, and I recognise it's a need, not a voluntary decision to participate in a public inquiry, when the discussion then takes place with Scottish Government about how that is funded, I think it would be helpful for Police Scotland to do some preparatory thinking, to be thinking based on past experience. A public inquiry typically costs so much money, typically involves so many staff, and what would that budget and staff be used for otherwise? It's much more impactful if you can tell a story. So if you say that the cost is £2 million and that represents so many bobbies on the beat or so many operations, it actually will have much more impact in your discussions. Because at the moment, just saying it's £2 million or £6 million or £25 million, the numbers are so large, it's hard to understand the impact on the ground from a policing point of view. So if that's something you could take away and have a think about. And then lastly, echoing Mary on the length of time and the extent to which public inquiries in Scotland are being carried out on a best value basis, there is clearly a piece of work to be done there. Not to be led by us, but I think that's something for us to take away and think with Police Scotland about how that exercise can be carried out and who else should be involved in that, because it is money which is being taken away from Police Scotland and other priorities of other organisations. So we do need to be really mindful that this is public money which is not being used in the way that it was initially intended to be used. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Alan, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just wanted to, the first instance, to give board members that the level of advocacy that the Chief Constable and myself particularly would make with Scottish Government officials around public inquiries is enormous. And sometimes it can't always be fully reflected in a public setting. The granular detail, we absolutely can do that. I would just, in some instances, recognise that there's a level of commercial sensitivity around, you know, officers serving in past, and in some instances, in a large public inquiry, it's straightforward. But I would just have to just give some careful thought to the level of detail that we could bring into the public domain as it relates to that. So there's that element. The other element, of course, is that we are bound by a government circular that dates 1978. Which sets the context in which we have an obligation and a requirement to support both serving and retired officers in matters like fatal accident inquiries and public inquiries and other forms of litigation. And SPA do have a role in that in terms of considering appeal. So as much as we try to control some of those things, that 1978 circular, old as it is the documentation which would hold our feet to the fire and ensuring that in inquiries like Sheikh Abayu or Emma Caldwell public inquiry, that any officer requiring to be represented in that will get legal support. So this is an area that we've been in for 4 or 5 years. I think we've worked incredibly hard in this area. I don't think, again, the government are any doubt about what we have to spend in this space and what the alternatives of that would be. It's maybe just a question, and you know, it's a crossroads point where 3 or 4 big things have came together at one point. So there's maybe a question as to whether a more public board should have a more detailed conversation about the implications on Police Scotland for public inquiries.
Thanks very much, Alan. I think that's helpful, and I'll try and capture that as we come to a close in a moment. Pauline, is there any comment you would wish to make in terms of how we move forward on this, mindful of Resources Committee oversight?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so throughout this financial year, legal costs and public inquiry costs have been one of the big financial risks threatening the achievement of financial balance, particularly in revenue resourcing terms this year. We've got Resources Committee next week, so we'll get the latest position then. At the moment, as you know, we are still forecasting financial balance overall, but we've just discussed the implications of achieving that in terms of the resources that public inquiries and fatal accident inquiries then draw from other areas, given it all comes out of the same budget. DCC Spears has also covered the representation that's been made, both in terms of public evidence sessions and in our submissions, as part of the determination of the budget for policing for next year. And Resources Committee next week will consider what decisions it would recommend to the board the following week in terms of agreeing a balanced budget proposal for 26-27. But as DCC Spears has mentioned, there are anticipated to be several significant public inquiries next year that will inevitably draw resources from other areas within policing, and it will be important for all authority members to understand what that means and the risks involved.
Thanks very much, Pauline. That's really helpful. Alan, I think you put your hand back up. Am I right? Or is it a legacy hand? No, it's not. You didn't. Okay, it's a legacy hand. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to bring that item to a close. Clearly, there is a commitment to report further to the committee on this issue. We can consider what the timescales for that might be in due course, but there's a commitment there in terms of a further reporting, and notwithstanding the point about commercial sensitivity, to ensure that captures the learning, appropriate breakdown of costs, opportunity cost, and so on. So all of those things that have been raised in the discussion. There is the wider point about advocacy in relation to budgetary provision on behalf of both Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority, and the work that we can do together in that space. And I think that's something that we all wish to come back to in this committee and in the Resources Committee, and indeed, as Pauline has indicated, at the board itself. Are members content to note the discussion on that basis for the time being? Thank you. Good. Okay, thanks, colleagues. So a little bit later than I was anticipating. I'm sure we can catch up. I'm going to move to item 6, which is the committee effectiveness report, and Karen Vallis is here.
Hi, good morning, Chair. The committee effectiveness process is an important part of our commitment to strengthen and improve our governance. The annual self-assessment process allows us to consider how the committee is performing against its terms of reference, and this informs committee development, member development, and committee work plans. It also informs the overall certificate of assurance process, which is required to be submitted to the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee in May as part of the annual audit and reporting process. So this year again, we asked stakeholders for their views, and the number of overall responses to the survey have doubled compared to last year, which is positive. Of those responses, one of them was specific to the Legal Committee. Overall, the results from the members' survey for the Legal Committee are positive, and they're similar to last year. There are some improvements around committee work reflecting organisational culture, processes to track progress, and actions being implemented in line with timescales. There were some downward trends. These were in relation to the quality of papers, the clarity of the asks within the papers, and also the work of the committee reflecting issues around capacity and capability. The stakeholder result received was positive. So the ask of the committee today is for members to discuss the results and confirm whether you're satisfied that the committee has discharged its terms of reference for this year to date. And I'm happy to take any questions on the process. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Karen. That's very helpful. I will open it up for questions before we take the actions that you've referred to. I know, Pauline, that you have a question. I'm just minded to say, but by way of introduction in terms of the questions, that notwithstanding what this data is telling us about the quality of committee papers, we have been on a really helpful journey with colleagues from Police Scotland in terms of the content and the presentation of reports to this committee over the last year. That work has been ongoing and has yielded some important improvements to the quality of the papers that we've received and therefore to our ability to interrogate what's in front of us. So I'm just minded to make that point. It's not to contradict what's in the survey, but I think it is important to reflect in the conversation that discussion. Okay, can I open it up for any further comments or questions? Pauline.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I would echo those points. I think there has definitely been an improvement and a real willingness from Police Scotland colleagues to take on board committee members' comments and suggestions for presentation of reports. And I view that very much as work in progress. And, you know, we heard earlier on under item 3 of the suggestions that Police Scotland colleagues are making in terms of further presentation and analysis of some of those claims and cases. We haven't particularly discussed, apart from the workplace organisational learning group, the consistency in reporting about learning, and maybe that's something that we could come back to as a committee with Police Scotland colleagues, how we get that feedback. We've got a kind of a suggestion under item 3 today that we have an update next month on those specific claims around disability discrimination. But I'm just thinking out loud whether we need something more systematic in terms of learning. And I'm not sure, again, whether it's for this committee or whether it's perhaps for People Committee. So I'd be interested in colleagues' views.
Thanks very much, Pauline. I'll take Nancy and then see if there are any further reflections from Police Scotland colleagues. Nancy.
Thank you, Chair. My comment is a wider comment around the self-assessment, tripping over the words there, of committee effectiveness. I think it would be good when the SPA team carries out and gets members to carry out that assessment, that members really be prodded to be specific about feedback. Because when I look at the paper, which there are a number of people who indicate that they're very happy, there are people who indicate that they're amber and feel that there is some improvement. Well, I think it is also incumbent on members to be precise about what improvements they want. You know, with the best will in the world, Police Scotland can't just read our minds and figure out what we would like. We need to be more precise about what we want. So if we think a paper is not hitting the mark 100%, we need to say what we want. So we've helpfully, for some of the Police Scotland papers in legal committee, we have given precise feedback, but I think that's something where in the effectiveness of committees, members need to be encouraged, prodded to give specific feedback about improvements that they want, because that will make improvements in effectiveness much easier to achieve.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm wondering, Karen or Vanessa, whether or not there's any comment you'd like to make on that point.
Thanks, Chair. So Nancy's comments in particular are very helpful, and I think we would agree with that. We are trying very hard to balance the ability for members to give free and frank feedback. So we let them do that anonymously, and that has helped with the feedback we've got each year. That's an improving picture, but absolutely it's something that we can certainly feed in. We can also feed in all of the feedback to the annual development days that each of the committees have, and we do them often with Police Scotland and Forensic Services around the table with us. So that's definitely something that we can take those conversations forward. And I'm not sure, Karen, is there anything else?
No, I think that's, covered it all. I think the committee priorities are discussed at development days, so all that feedback can be incorporated into those discussions as well.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks, thanks, Karen. I'm glad that was a helpful point. Just before I move to complete this item, Police Scotland colleagues, do you have any reflections that you wish to share with us in relation to this report and the comments that have been made? I'm thinking particularly of Pauline's comments. Claire.
Just from my perspective, if there are, I mean, I welcome the feedback from the committee during the meetings in terms of the presentation and the quality of the report, and I do recognise that that's still very much a work in progress, but happy to take on board and continue to take on board any feedback in terms of the reports that are being produced.
Done it again. Thanks very much, Claire. That's a very helpful commitment. And I think it's for us in relation to the point that Pauline made to come back to as a committee how we wish to ensure that learning can be most effectively captured and considered by us. With that in mind, are the committee prepared, content to, which is the legal committee work plan? Are there any questions or comments that members wish to raise in relation to that? If not, can we note it? I know it's something that you will wish to consider in due course, Nancy, as you take the helm in the committee. Okay, can we note that item? That takes us to the conclusion of the public part of the meeting. Before I close this part of the meeting, I did say I would come back to this. I think it's important that we, as a committee, place on record our thanks to Mary Pitt-Keithley and Tom Halpin, who isn't here today, for their contributions to this committee. I know there'll be lots of thanks and plaudits coming your way in a variety of places, but they're very well earned. So thank you very much, Mary, and I know we'll record that in relation to Tom as well.
Chair, if I can also jump in at this point and thank you for your time and support to the committee as chair as I come in. I have to say I'm personally very grateful that you'll still be a committee member so that I can tap into your corporate memory of what's been discussed before. But thank you very much for having chaired the committee so effectively and kept us on track. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for your comments, Chair. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Mary. That's great and much appreciated, Nancy. Thank you. Look forward to working with you as you take the helm. Okay, we're now